Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Tuesday, September 6th, 2022, Rosewood, Florida. Rosewood, a name that will live in infamy. It was one of the Black Wall Streets, where in the years immediately after the end of chattel slavery, Black Americans established their own townships. Vibrant bastions of prosperity for Black people where they built lives for themselves and a future for their children. But for the resentful racist white supremacists who lived close to these bastions of prosperity, seeing competition for the very first time in their lives sent them into a bestial rage. And so at the turn of the 20th century, there came a nationwide series of organized white mobs who systematically descended on every Black enclave they could and destroyed them, as well as carrying out other organized violent racial attacks on Black people nationwide to kill as many Black people as they could. The pretense was usually some pathetic lie that a white woman had been raped or whatever, but even the white supremacist marauders themselves knew that this wasn't true. These race attacks were neither random nor spontaneous. They were not the result of some perceived insult or wrong against the white community. When you look at how widespread these attacks were and how they recycled the same phony rationale over and over, including with the participation of the U.S. government, you see that there was a program at work here. The Rosewood Massacre was carried out exactly 100 years ago, 1923. The death toll that the white media is willing to admit to is dozens of innocent Black people murdered by the white supremacist mobs, but of course we know that number is far higher. 100 years later, some white supremacists in that town want to prove that their race war against Black people is still ongoing. That brings us to one of the victims in this case, Dr. Marvin Dunn. He's a professor of psychology at Florida International University as well as a historian. He lives in Miami, but he owns 5 acres of land in Rosewood. On last September the 6th, Dr. Dunn had taken his son and 6 other Black men to survey his property. He was discussing a land clearing project with a local company. His plan was to have the land improved and fenced off in preparation for an event he wants to hold in 2023 to mark the anniversary of the Rosewood Massacre. Dr. Dunn, as well as all of the men who were there for this survey, were Black. Now, during this event, a white man approached the group, demanding to know what they were doing there and yelling that they had no right to be there. Dr. Dunn recognized this man, though he didn't know his name. He was a local troublemaker from across the street who lived in the area. According to witness reports, Dr. Dunn was firm but polite, telling this white man that it was none of his business. This white man wanted to argue. Dr. Dunn tried to politely dismiss him, but there's no way to reason with an unreasonable person. After ranting for a while, the white man walked off to his home across the street. That seemed to be the end of the matter, but then the white man got into his Ford pickup truck, revved the engine, and charged out of his driveway as fast as he could at the group, nearly hitting Dr. Dunn's son. He then began menacing the group with his vehicle, making several passes at them. While he did that, he yelled the N-word at them, screaming, "What are you effing niggers doing out on this roadway?" Bobby Privat, the owner of the land clearing company that Dr. Dunn had brought out to survey the land, was one of the men this racist white man was screaming at. Mr. Privat said that it was at that point that he put his hands on his own personal defense and was ready to protect himself and those with him. The Levy County Sheriff's Office was called, and the responding deputy made note of the skid marks left by the miscreant. This violent white supremacist was right across the street from Dr. Dunn's property. This criminal was clearly a threat, but it was clear the local thugs with badges were on the side of the white supremacist attacker. One sheriff's representative was interviewed shortly after the incident. His name is Scott Tummond, a name that ironically sounds similar to Thurmond, and he tried to minimize the violent attack, saying, "It looks like they were cussing at each other, back and forth, and that maybe a vehicle lurched in the direction of Dr. Dunn's son." Now, that's just a masterpiece of lies right there. Bobby Privat, the man who owns the land clearing company, stated that there was no back and forth. The racist man was simply a belligerent SOB. Dr. Dunn was told a report wouldn't be available to him for days, but in the meanwhile, the white man in the pickup wouldn't be arrested. The authorities refused to arrest the perpetrator. The local white sheriff and his deputies seemed to also be angry that Dr. Dunn owned land there. Dr. Dunn, it should be noted, is also a vocal critic of the race-baiting policies and rhetoric of Governor DeSantis. I'm sure that as much as DeSantis likes to have the local thugs with badges around, they probably knew this too. Dr. Dunn would now become a vocal critic of the Levy County Sheriff's Office as well. He demanded an arrest be made. Dr. Dunn also took to Twitter to tell his 12,000 followers about the incident. But when the sheriffs dragged their feet, Dunn contacted local media as well as staying on the sheriff's behinds, telling them that the pace of their investigation led him to the conclusion that the department was either grossly incompetent or racially biased. But Dr. Dunn didn't stop with the local sheriff's clavern. He decided to also reach out to the FBI and tell them about the incident, that this hate crime had just occurred. The combination of personal and outside pressure finally forced the sheriffs to do their job, and after allowing this racist thug to remain on the loose for a week, 61-year-old David Allen Emanuel was finally arrested on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. He was given a paltry $50,000 bond and later released. By this point, the FBI's Jacksonville field office began an investigation of their own and had reached out to Dr. Dunn. 2 weeks ago, this white supremacist thug was indicted by a federal grand jury on 6 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, each count with a hate crime enhancement. And of course, you won't be surprised to learn that this wasn't Emanuel's first run-in with the law. He has a criminal record going all the way back to the 1970s. Over the years, he's been arrested for burglary and fleeing from police. But nothing was ever done about him. The charges against him always seemed to conveniently get dropped, and in this case, the sheriffs didn't even want to bring any charges until Dr. Dunn forced them to. This goes to show that even 100 years after the Rosewood Massacre, the same anti-black mentality of the people who carried out that violent atrocity is alive today. We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power Tools. Because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work. What happened to Dr. Dunn and his associates and even his son 7 months ago was nothing more than a small-scale reenactment of the same crime that had happened 100 years ago, and it even had the same cast of characters. You had a white supremacist who decided that seeing a black man who had more than he did was enough to justify a violent race attack. You also had a sheriff's department who were complicit in the crime and refused to enforce the law because they agreed with the violent white supremacist. They see the David Emanuels as being the irregular forces of white supremacy, the non-uniformed operatives who can carry out the kind of random violence that the police don't always think they can get away with. So when that racist punk was screaming, "You're not supposed to be here," what he meant was, "You're not supposed to let me see you having more than me." That will make a white supremacist lose what passes for their minds faster than anything, seeing a black person who's doing better than they are. And this Emanuel character wasn't alone. When the local Flatfoot showed up, they had this black doctor who owned acres of land and was discussing developing it. Those sheriffs were green with envy. You had this educated black man from Miami who owned more land than they ever would, doing better than they ever would, and as far as they were concerned, well, hell, 100 years ago we would have been able to do what we wanted to these niggers, but now look at them, they're taking the town back. One of the interesting things about this incident is how the white media has chosen to report on it, or rather not report on it. They refuse to mention that this happened in Rosewood. None of them would say the name Rosewood unless they felt they had no other choice. Usually they refer to the county where it happened. They did their best to minimize, if not outright avoid saying Rosewood altogether. Because we all know it's no accident that this happened in Florida, and it's no coincidence that it's happening now. For the last few years, Florida has been the epicenter of all manner of anti-black rhetoric from the state's highest officials, and they've made it clear that the message legislation they've been passing into law was meant to target black people and to set us up to be the targets of white supremacist violence, starting with political violence. And these white supremacist residents down there understand clearly that all of this is the white supremacists getting on code. They've seen it from the very beginning. They know these laws are nothing less than an invitation from the the white political leaders of the state to engage in violence against black people. The David Emanuels see the governor and various state legislators screaming day and night that white children are under attack from history books and that they have to fight back. And DeSantis saying that Florida is where woke goes to die. And then DeSantis and the rest of the Republicans identify anything black as being woke. And they rail against it and declare that anything woke has to be eliminated. This is the Christopher Rufo effect. His little crusade that the Manhattan Institute pays him to carry out is meant to produce exactly this anti-black violence. This was the entire point of doing it. Performative extremism from GOP politicians in the form of phony moral panic about made-up threats to white people, especially white children, and something needs to be done to protect them. This is why he and the other anti-black racist propagandists have been pushing lies about critical race theory and other made-up threats to white society. The same way that 100 years ago, the white supremacists of their day used lies about white women being raped as the phony pretense to initiate their racial attacks. Today, we see lies about white children being threatened by history books. The people telling these lies and the angry white supremacist mobs who snarl and rage about it, they know that they're lying, same way the white supremacist marauders 100 years ago knew full well the phony stories about white women being raped by black men were just nothing more than a pack of lies. They know what the real purpose is of these lies. They know it's meant to get them on code, and that their job is to play along and pretend to be concerned about whatever. But most of all, their job is to be angry. Sure, it's phony anger, but it gives them entree to do what they've wanted to do, is to just attack and kill black people openly, which is what it's actually about. When people like Christopher Rufo spread lies using racial code words like critical race theory and woke, everyone understands that these are merely euphemisms for black, and that the actual target that the Rufos and DeSantises are trying to focus all of this white rage at is black people. The book bannings and other public displays of social ethnic cleansing are simply the first step. Rufo and the wealthy white supremacists funding him have been carrying out a racial exercise to get the white supremacists on code. The vehemence and vitriol of the governor and the rest of the GOP establishment is not a dog whistle to the David Emanuels, it's a foghorn telling them that the political leadership is on their side. This is not merely a wink and a nod to commit violence, this is an open invitation to do so. And that's why this happened. This is the environment that we're in. You can't wait to see if the Democrats are going to do anything because they're in league with the white supremacists. Black people have a right and duty to protect themselves from white supremacist violence. What happened here is no one-off. The white supremacists are using cars as their weapons, and it's been going on for a while. Last week I told you about anti-black hate criminal Aqeel Khan, who ran over a black man with his car 6 times. The victim survived, but if he had had personal defense that day, would the attack even have happened? I told you a couple of weeks ago about Hunter Holman, who attacked a black family in Las Vegas with his vehicle. The father of the family carried personal defense and used it to protect himself and those he cared about. And you've seen it happen here as well. Mr. Privat had the right idea. Personal defense is a must. Black people who are prepared to stop white supremacist violence are the ones who the white supremacists don't try to run over. Instead, the enemy winds up being brought to justice. The moral of the story, better safe than sorry. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day. And be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Earth Angel, Brian Walton, ACAB Devil, Melvin Johnson, and Jerlene Harris. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.